Now, God's been good to us. This past year, He has blessed us. Yes, we've seen some tragedies. We've seen some things that beset us. We saw some things that brought pain and anguish. We saw those things, but all of this is a part of life. But we can always go back and look and remember and say that God has been good to us. God has been blessing us. I don't know about you, but I have felt very blessed this past year. But you see, all of these things that we look back, and somebody said you're not supposed to look back. Well, I think sometimes it does us good to take a look back, especially to see where we have come from. But I don't know about you, but I'm so glad that God has been with us and blessed us and all of these things. But all of this is past. The last year is gone. We cannot bring it back. I'm sure that if every one of us in the building today had the power, I believe we would bring back last year, and I believe there would be some things that we would change, would we not? There's some things that I see that I would change if I could bring the past year back, but I can't do it, so I must not dwell on those things. Listen to me, church. The past is past. It's gone. You cannot bring it back. Those things that happened last year, you cannot control those. They're already past. They're already over. The Bible teaches us that we're looking forward. We're in the future. We're in the present this day, but we're also looking in the future. Now, if we're going to fulfill the will of God and the plan of God and the purpose of God in our lives, we must go ahead, right? We must go forward. We cannot fulfill, we cannot finish, we cannot do those things that God called us to do if we stand on neutral ground. Somebody said, well, it didn't work for me last year. I know what I'll do this year. I'll just take a stand, and I'll stand and not go anywhere. No, that's not right. We must go forward. Paul, first of all, began to realize, and I think Paul probably looked back on his past life, and if you remember the life of the apostle before he became the great preacher that he was, Paul wasn't always a perfect man. In fact, he did things that was contrary to the will of God. If you remember, in one instance, he held the coat of those that stoned Stephen, and he thought he was doing God's service. Well, on the road to Damascus, God changed his mind through a revelation. The light shone down and knocked him from the horse, and on the ground he began to realize that he needed Christ. And you know the rest of the story from there, that God brought him to where he was in the ministry, and he became the greatest apostle of them all. Now Paul is saying, I want to know Christ. The way I want to know him is in his death, burial, and resurrection. And the only way that I can know Christ and really know his plan and know his purpose and know his will for my life is for me to be conformable unto his death. In other words, Paul was saying, I must die daily. Church, listen to me this morning. If we want to fulfill God's will in our life, and if I ask each one of you today, how many would like to do the will of God? Probably everybody would raise your hand. You would say, yes, I want to do God's will. Is there a person here this morning what does not want to do the will of God? I don't think we'll have a hand anywhere in the house. We would all say, I want to do the will of God. Well, in order to do the will of God, we must first become conformable unto Jesus, and we must die as Jesus did. Oh, I'm not talking about being nailed to the cross. I'm not talking about going through the things that Jesus did, but we must come conformable unto his death. And how can we do that? First of all, Jesus said, if any man come after me, let him first deny himself, take up the cross, and follow me.